Welcome to What's Your Mount Rushmore podcast with hosts Mark Duvall and John Hanson.
Are you kidding me?
Two old friends and knuckleheads discussing and covering their top four choices for any and all topics, making up their Mount Rushmore selections each week. Nothing is off limits. As you listen, remember we always want to know, what's your Mount Rushmore?
All right, podcast junkies, you're back. We're back. We're all back. Welcome back to What's Your Mount Rushmore. My name's Mark Duvall. I'm one of the hosts.
Yes, you are. And I am John Hanson, the other guy over here. Glad you could make it for another episode. It's always good to see you and hear you.
Likewise, shit-ass.
All right. Not very sincere, but that's okay. We'll move on. We'll work on that for future episodes.
I didn't know you were going to get all deep right away.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Hey, I'm in my feels today. It's because we have such a great episode. This one is going to be a fun one because it's a topic that you and I, we've talked about this topic for years and years and years anyway, and how much we love this. And now now we get a chance to talk about it with the world. Today we're listing our Mount Rushmores of HBO series, the actual TV series that have aired on HBO, not movies, series. And there have been so many great ones.
I could have two Mount Rushmores from HBO. Are you kidding? Like,
yeah.
What a platform that's created such great TV.
Yes, absolutely. And there's so many other cable networks out there that have great series as well. So I'm glad that we focused on HBO too and didn't do something more broad. There's going to be some obvious ones. There's going to be some that are probably a little bit more of a surprise, but we're going to tackle it. Before we get into it, I want to say that HBO, or Home Box Office, as it's officially called, was launched in November of 1972. Which was a shock to me. I had no idea it was that old. It's over 50 years old.
Didn't know that until you just said it. I would have guessed and this would have even felt like a stretch, is to say 82.
Yeah, well, funny you mentioned that year. Before I get to that, so when it launched in 1972, it only had 365 subscribers, and it was strictly in Northeast Pennsylvania. It was like a very regional area where they had it. And the first program that they played was actually an NHL game between the Rangers and the Canucks. So it started out as a sports-focused network, actually. And it slowly grew throughout the 70s. They kind of kept doing a lot of sporting events. They had a lot of boxing events, and they started introducing a lot of movies as well. But in 1982, the year you mentioned, that's the first year that they actually had 24-hour programming. So it only had been maybe a daytime, 5, 6, 7 hours or whatever. But in 1982, it launched with 24-hour programming. And so it's interesting that you mentioned that year. And
now it's
today,
like a huge thing. It's a streaming service. It's obviously part of a cable upgrade.
It's a whole thing. There's a bunch of channels. They all kind of fall under the umbrella of Max, they call it right now. And today they went from 365 subscribers in 1972 to 100 million subscribers today, including me and you, I'm sure.
And me. Oh, are you kidding?
Yeah. We talk about the different, streaming networks that we've had over the years, Susan, my wife, and I, and HBO, or Max, as you call it, is probably one I'll never give up, because I do love what they do.
Well, it has too many good shows. How can how can you not? And it occasionally will throw a comedy special in. That's great.
Yeah.
You're right with boxing. But yeah, it's just it's such a unique one place to go and just you shop their menu, and there's so many good movies and TV series, and there's a lot that I haven't even got to yet, and I plan to on HBO. That's how much there is.
Absolutely. And the nice thing about it with the streaming now is you can go back and watch these old shows that you might have missed the first time around, and which is a good segue to people that are listening to us. If you hear us talk about one of these shows and you're intrigued, hey, you could probably see it on Max today. You could probably go back and find an episode from something that's 20 years
it's all
old.
there for you.
Yeah. So feel free to dive in and tackle these if you haven't watched any of these. So speaking of diving in,
you dive head first.
I'm going to start with a show that I think I suspect is going to be on your list too. It's a show we've talked about on this podcast in previous episodes. It's Curb Your Enthusiasm.
That's
the great.
It's on my list. 100%.
It's on your list. Yeah, let's get that out of the way. Okay. Yeah, I thought it would be. The great Larry David, of course, created this show. Stars in the show. It's essentially a show about him, a fictionalized exaggerated version of who I think we probably think he really is in real life. What you may not know is it started out as a 1-hour special in 1999. It was both HBO and Larry David thought it was going to be a one-time thing, and
wow,
it was a hit. And they said, "Hey, do you want to do some more of these?" And Larry, being Larry, he's like, "Sure, why not?" and
a hit it became.
Yeah, the first episode in that first season came about a year later in 2000. Ended up having 120 episodes over 12 seasons, and with it finally wrapping up earlier this spring in April. And I think that you and I both we've talked about it on this episode, or this podcast. We both love the show. I'm sure there's a lot of things that you want to talk about it as well. We'll say this: Rolling Stone listed as the 19th greatest TV series of all time, and it was nominated for 51 Primetime Emmy Awards.
Oh, okay.
51 nominations, and that includes like production and editing and all that stuff, obviously, but still 51 nominations.
I'd like to know what those 18 shows are. You said it's 19th all time?
Yeah. Greatest series of all time, 19. I mean,
because man, there's a part of me when it comes to comedy specifically. I think Larry David is probably the king, because he not only does he have Curb Your Enthusiasm on the resume, he also has that other little show he did called Seinfeld.
Yes,
and so to me, he's kind of the king of half-hour comedies.
Sorry, what is this? Where are your shoes?
Fuck. I threw them out.
Why?
I had an accident outside. I stepped in it.
And dog poop?
Yeah.
Why didn't you wash it off?
Wash my shoes off? Are you serious? You want me to go in the sink with what, a file? They get deep into crevices there. You can't get that out. Once it's in, it's done. I mean, I could have had the one shoe option, but is that any better?
It's ridiculous. And your socks are ridiculous.
The socks and the shoes, not that much of a difference. It's like a thin shoe.
Okay, it's not a shoe, it's a sock. You know it, we know it, everyone knows it.
Okay, so I'm walking around with socks. It's better than coming in here with a stinky sneaker in the Holocaust Museum of all places.
And, and Curb Your Enthusiasm, as it relates to comedy, could be the greatest of all time. It could be the GOAT. That's why you were right, assuming I would have this on, just like I assumed you would. And I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't not pick it with that assumption because it's that good. Curb Your Enthusiasm there's a lot of parallels to Seinfeld, but it's like Seinfeld on steroids with an R rating.
It's a very good description.
It almost was. I love Seinfeld. I know you love Seinfeld, but I have to say I like Curb Your Enthusiasm more than I like Seinfeld.
Yeah, me too.
Which is a weird thing to admit. Like you'd feel like if back in the 90s in the run of Seinfeld, you would think, well, it's never going to get better than this as it relates to a sitcom. But then the guy who created it comes out with one more. This time I'm just going to make it about me.
yeah. Really,
it's even
exactly.
better. Like kind of the theme for because this is now one of my 4 picks. The constant that's kind of consistent through my picks, it very much is character based. And when you look, because of the characters that are introduced to you in these series, they're unforgettable. And Curb Your Enthusiasm is at the top of that list. Like Leon Black. Are you kidding me? Is there a time that he has something in the show where he has to speak and it doesn't end with you laughing? Like it's impossible. It is impossible for him to say a line and you not laugh.
Yeah.
Meaning me, meaning you, meaning I got to imagine everybody who's a fan of Curb.
This shit don't go down in a black neighborhood. You know what I mean?
All right, I'm going to go up there. Unless you want to.
If I go up there, I will kill this motherfucker. Michael J. Fox about to be Michael J. fucked up in a minute. But you go up there, you and him, that's a fair fight and shit. You know what I'm saying?
How's that a fair fight?
Shaking motherfuckers like that, little kids and shit, old people, motherfuckers who can't defend themselves, and that's perfect. You two face off, that shit is even Steven.
So Leon Black, then you have Marty Funkhauser.
Oh, yeah.
And again, it's sad because Bob Einstein has passed away, but
yep.
Marty Funkhauser's character is kind of the same thing. Would he speak without it ending in a laugh? Yeah. And that's what's so great about this show. Like Richard Lewis, another one, rest in peace, for God's sake. And Larry obviously is the backbone. It's the whole thing, but it's who he surrounds himself with. Perfect characters.
He does.
And the development of these characters over the 12 seasons it aired, incredible.
And they're all they're all basically friends of his, essentially, that he brings in for these regulars. You could tell that they're all friends in real life. They just you know they are. And so much of that show was ad-libbed on the spot. That's kind of the famous thing. Each scene, they'd get an outline of what the scene was about, what the characters were talking about, but it was strictly an outline. It wasn't scripted. There was no specific jokes or dialogue. And the actors would just ad-lib it from there. And I'm going to assume that they probably ad-libbed the scenes multiple times and then,
because you still got to take the best take.
Yeah, cherry pick the best parts or the best takes and the best jokes that they would have and all that. But even so, it's when you think of it that way, it doesn't come across that way. It comes across as a show that was written and highly edited and scripted out because everything is so funny. But yet it wasn't. It was really, truly ad-libbed, which kind of says something for those actors that you just mentioned, that they were that good at doing that.
The trust Larry had in them.
The trust Larry had, and also the guest stars too, because he'd bring guest stars in, and he wouldn't bring a guest star in that couldn't handle that. If they couldn't handle the ad-libbing process, they wouldn't even bother bringing them in. And he had a ton of great guest stars. Sometimes they were people that were on, like Sean Hayes had a funny bit playing his lawyer in this last season. But a lot of the guest stars played themselves because, again, it took place in Hollywood, so they were playing versions of themselves. Like Ted Danson plays a version of himself, sort of. And you mentioned Richard Lewis, of course, plays a version of himself. But here's one thing I bet you didn't know. In season 4, they shot a bunch of episodes, or shot a few episodes anyway, at Dodger Stadium. So apparently during that show, some of the footage shows a guy who's at the game, just a fan sitting there watching the game, and he's clearly identifiable in the show. But this guy was accused later of murder. He was accused of killing somebody and was actually facing a death sentence.
That's right.
And they went back and they used footage from this because it was time stamped. The production company knew what day they were filming and what games they were at, and they used that as an alibi. This guy got off because he could not have been at the crime scene. He was at the Dodger game, and they happened to catch him there in the episode of Curb. So his lawyers used that footage to get him off of this charge. That's just amazing to me, and I'm surprised that wasn't a bigger news story when it happened. And
real life stuff. Like that's someone's life.
Serious stuff.
To be found guilty of that and then to face the death sentence and then you're like, I didn't do it. Prove it.
Well, let me introduce you to HBO.
But see, that's the thing. I feel like we've said this before. We could almost fill a whole hour of a podcast just talking about Curb because we're both such fans of it. It's so damn funny. But the unscripted element is probably one of my favorite parts of the show is that that, but you never think of it until kind of the episode's done. And that's where I go back to J.B. Smoove, who plays Leon Black. The stuff that comes out of his mouth, I just wonder sometimes how many times do they have to do that shoot? Because he's catching them off guard. If it's unscripted, it means they're hearing this while the camera is rolling for the first time. How many times do they got to reshoot that shit just so that they can stay composed because of what he says?
Good point.
So I'm going to dive into another one that really, it's not like it gets smaller from here.
It's not your turn, but that's okay. If you want to jump ahead of me. No, it's not your turn. It's my turn.
I suppose you started it. I matched. Bastard. All right. You ping pong dink. Right back at you then.
Don't make me mute you. Come on now.
Yeah!
All right. My list, it kind of goes, I think it actually pretty much goes chronologically. I didn't do this on purpose, but it goes sort of in order. Like Curb ran for 20 plus years over the course of those seasons, so they overlap. But my next one is The Wire. And The Wire was one of those shows when it was on, it was a phenomenon. I mean, people talked about it all the time. When this show was on, I was working at the Minnesota Timberwolves, and we talk about it, after the next day. We talk about the show quite a bit, and it was just a blast. And it ran for 5 seasons. 60 total episodes. It was created by a former journalist who had covered the Baltimore Police Department when he was a journalist, and that's where the series was set. Series was both set and filmed in Baltimore, covering the Baltimore crime scene, and then also it showed both the police equally and the criminals that the police were trying to catch equally. You got to see the inside stories of both groups of people, which was so interesting because so many shows really focus on either the cops or the bad guys, and this show honestly took you deep, deep, deep inside of both. And that was what I think I loved so much about it.
I mean, you call summer war. And pretty soon, everybody gonna be running around acting like warriors.
They gonna be running around on a damn crusade, storming corners, slapping on cuffs, racking up body counts. And soon the neighborhood that you're supposed to be policing, that's just occupied territory.
You follow drugs, you get drug addicts and drug dealers. But you start to follow the money, and you don't know where the fuck it's gonna take you.
It was different from so many other scripted shows because each season was a completely new storyline. Each season had a story that would wrap up at the end of the season, and then the next season, a whole new storyline, which made it easier to watch because you didn't, some people hate shows that go on and on and on. You got to keep watching season after season to find how these stories wrap up. With this one, you watch one season, it wraps up, and you're good to go, and you can move on and maybe watch the next season if you want, or come back to it later. And I mean, the show introduced so many amazing characters too. It plus some of the coolest character names probably in all of cable TV. I'm going to list some of them for you. Stringer Bell, Avon Barksdale, Weebay Bryce, Bunk Moreland, and there was an informant that they only called Bubbles. I don't even know what his real name was. They always just called him Bubbles, and he looked like a guy that you would call Bubbles too. And this doesn't even cover probably who's regarded as one of the best characters in TV history. Most publications list him as one of the best characters ever. It's played by the late great Michael K. Williams, and it's Omar Little. And Omar was just about as badass of a character as there has ever been on TV.
Omar coming, yo. Omar coming, yo. Did you hear that? Omar coming. Come on. Get out of here. Omar coming. Omar. Put that shit down. I said Omar coming. Somebody is coming now. Come on, let's go.
Yeah. Y'all need to open this door, man, for a huff and puff. Come on now, by the heads of your chinny chin chin.
Omar, you best roll out. We up in here with the Mac 10.
Oh, I think's not, Terrell. I think's not. Y'all might need to think this through and stop wasting my time. Because Omar can come back tomorrow. And the next day. And the next day. And I will put a bullet in all y'all behind what happened right now. You heard?
Everybody who's ever watched The Wire will tell you that Omar is their favorite character because of the way he was portrayed. He was just a street thug, but he was a very interesting guy, and everybody was afraid of him. And it was a very interesting way he was portrayed. Unfortunately, Michael K. Williams passed away a couple years ago. Great actor who's been on other shows that I know you watch, Boardwalk Empire for one.
Yeah, also another HBO show.
Another HBO show that was on my longer list. TV Guide lists The Wire as the 6th greatest show of all time. So that gets a little higher up in that listing. The other thing about this, the people who watched The Walking Dead would probably know this already, but the guy that created The Walking Dead, Robert Kirkman, he was a huge fan of The Wire, and there's a ton of actors that were on The Wire that he incorporated into The Walking Dead over the years. There's probably been like 6 or 7 different actors that he used on The Walking Dead that were on The Wire, and it almost became a game of who you're going to see next from The Wire. Some of the seasons were better than others, I'll admit that, but even so, overall, had to be on my Mount Rushmore. The Wire had to be there.
And I figured it would because you single-handedly are the person that influenced me to start it. And I did watch The Wire. It was definitely, when I started listing out my shows from HBO, I did end up loving the show. Didn't make my Mount Rushmore, but I certainly suspected it would be on yours because I knew how much you really got into it. And rightfully so. Great show. I love that pick.
Yeah, that's a show I miss. I miss the storylines. I miss the characters.
I miss it.
I miss it. I just miss good TV.
That's true. And speaking of good TV, there's my window. I'm going to jump through it. My next pick, it's, again, to me, this is just as big almost to me as Curb. I know you'll agree. We've talked about this show before. We've referenced it before. It's The Sopranos.
Yeah.
And again, how are we going to sit here and do a HBO Mount Rushmore? And really those two, Curb and now The Sopranos, they almost have to be. And again, created by David Chase. And for me, this is the show that just changed TV series as we knew them, as far as quality. Like, there's always been good television. We all know that. But when The Sopranos came along on HBO, it really just opened everyone's eyes of like, oh my God, we can make this kind of TV?
Got yourself a gun. Your mama always said you'd be there. Chose
because it was like taking all the good stuff you see from movies about, the America's fascination with the mafia and organized crime. But what was so cool was that it tied it into today's world, like a real living family with a real organization that's amongst us now in today's world. We talked about this with Curb. The character development in The Sopranos to me is second to none. From the 6 seasons that it was aired, the development of each of these characters is so well done. And it was fascinating. The show just grabbed you. If you were a fan of The Sopranos, you didn't like it. You loved it. The only knock I have on The Sopranos was the horrible finale, because it was one of the dumbest ways I've ever seen a really good show come to an end. Because I remember watching it live on HBO on that Sunday night. And when that show came to an end, you're just kind of confused and you want to throw something because you feel like you just got robbed.
Yeah.
And that's my only negative thing. So it's never to disparage anyone from starting the series. It's just a really bad last 1 minute.
Yeah. To me, I don't really know how I would end it anyway. I mean, and I'm
True.
not going to. That doesn't say that I'm excusing what they did. I'm just saying that I don't have a better answer necessarily, but I'm also not a TV writer, so they should have been able to come up with something better than that, better than what they did.
Well, I mean, look at Larry
laziest.
David. I mean, he got a lot of shit for how he ended Seinfeld, and then all these years later, when he just ended Curb, it's like he did a little self-correct and even acknowledged and poked fun at himself for how Seinfeld ended, but then righted the wrong. Yeah, obviously, most TV series don't have like a spin-off where you can kind of fix you can correct what you did in the past.
The show didn't deserve that kind of an ending. That's a good point. I will say this: The Sopranos is not on my list. And
I was just going to ask you if this is on your list.
You're probably surprised that it's not on my list. But the reason why I didn't put it on my list, it absolutely belongs on my Mount Rushmore. However, the only reason I didn't is because I knew, for one, that you would have it on yours, and I knew that gave us a chance to talk about it, and it also gave me a chance to squeeze an extra pick in. So I'm kind of cheating by pushing one of my picks off on you, and then that way I was able to actually get 5 choices. Took that up your butt.
Take it easy.
Wow. I won't, but
well, and here the other thing too is we had an episode back for those listeners who haven't listened to some of our earlier episodes. We did an episode about TV theme songs, and The Sopranos was one of the ones that I picked as my Mount Rushmore, and you didn't. You just barely left them off, and you were.
I was a little upset about it.
Yeah, you were torn, rightfully so, and so because of that episode, I knew there's no way you were gonna leave them off twice. So it was essentially
a rebound.
Yeah, it was a rebound. I figured you would have Curb on your list, Curb Your Enthusiasm, but I knew you would have Sopranos on your list. So this gave us a chance to talk about it, and I'm glad that you did, because great show. I loved it. By me not having it on my list is by no means a knock on that show, because I do love it. I've watched it through multiple times, and will again at some point in the future, I'm sure. So, and
talk about a show. I guess you said it earlier about The Wire. I do. I miss The Sopranos.
Oh, poor you.
Oh my God. What am I going to do?
Well, and you and I have talked about TV in general, and how TV is better now, or at least better, say, over the last 25 years than it was before that. And I think The Sopranos is a good line in the sand. What came before The Sopranos versus what came after. TV just got better. A lot of the movie actors started working in TV. A lot of the movie directors started working in TV. It just became better. And I think we owe a lot to The Sopranos. But I'll jump into my number 3 pick here. We're halfway through.
Let's do this, Lewis.
So I'm bouncing between comedies and dramas. So I had a comedy to start, drama with The Wire second. My third pick is Veep, which was a half-hour sitcom-style comedy that ran on HBO, starring Julia Louis-Dreyfus. It actually had a bunch of stars on the show, but she was the main person. She played basically the title character. She was the Veep at the beginning. It's funny that she was the Veep, meaning the vice president, at the beginning of that episode or beginning of that series. And she didn't stay Veep for very long. She kind of bounced around and had different roles, and was even president very briefly at one time. But the show always was called Veep, and it ran for 7 seasons, 65 total episodes. And because these episodes are only 30-minute 30 minutes long. It's a really good bingeable show.
That show was so damn funny.
Oh, I think it's one of the funniest. I think it's one of the funniest TV shows in history, let alone HBO. The rapid fire insults on this show were absolutely. They were just amazing. I mean, you could finish watching this entire series all the way through. Go back immediately. I'm not talking like a year later. You could go back immediately and start again from episode 1, and you'd hear jokes that you missed because it's just rapid fire, one after the other, and most of the jokes are insults that they're throwing at each other.
Yeah,
they're making fun of each other.
Conversation.
This must be the first pet project of yours that didn't involve resorting to chloroform.
If you kill his mother and then dress in her skin, that's technically illegal.
Stop trying to polish my dick, you fucking four-eyed failure.
What the hell do you do on Air Force One? Rub your dick on the seats?
You know, you're about as annoying as a condom filled with fire ants.
Makes me think of wine. It's actually how I like my reds.
You like your reds through a bendy straw too, right, Mike? Yeah, I don't want to be like Mike, okay? Even Mike doesn't want to be like Mike.
You know, all this melodrama really explains your 3 divorces.
Well, I'd like to divorce your head from your fucking neck.
It was actually nominated for the best primetime comedy series 7 years in a row, and it won 3 times as the best primetime comedy series. And Julie Louis-Dreyfus won the Emmy for lead actress for this show 6 years in a row. That's just unheard of, including her nominations and her wins for other shows. She actually has a Wikipedia page just dedicated to all the different awards that she's been nominated for over the years. She's been between just the Golden Globes, Screen Actors Guild, and Emmys. She was nominated for 56 awards and has 21 different wins. Now, these are for multiple TV shows. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about her because it's more about the show, but that's just shocking. And she had a big part to why that show was such a success. And we mentioned the ad-lib portion in Curb and how Curb was ad-libbed a lot of that. The same thing kind of happened during the rehearsals for Veep. So that they would have scripts that they would read, but during rehearsals, the cast was always encouraged to ad-lib and use their own improvisations to make the scenes funnier. And the writers were always there. If what they were doing in these rehearsals worked, the writers quickly wrote down what they said and re-scripted it, and then they went and shot it that way. So it's kind of whatever was written was improved by the actors' interactions during rehearsals, which I think is kind of a neat way of filming a show too, and especially with this cast because they are all so damn funny. I mean, everybody in this show. Tony Hale, he won, I think, an Emmy or 2. There's just a whole bunch of people in this show that are just hilarious.
Again, it's one of those shows that damn near throughout the course of any scene and the dialogue that's written or ad-libbed, it just gets you. And you're right, because you almost have to watch these episodes again because you'll miss things because you're laughing.
Yeah.
And you don't hear that the very next line was just as funny as the one that made you laugh the first time.
That happened all the time. I mean, I've watched Veep all the way through a few different times, and I guarantee you that I've missed. Probably after watching it twice all the way through, now I've missed things. I should watch it a third time. I love it. Talk about shows that we said we miss shows, and again, I miss a show that's this funny because there's just not many shows that are that funny consistently, episode to episode. Always hilarious.
You can rely on it. When you watch, you're going to laugh. There's not a doubt in your mind because you know what you're getting into and you're excited to watch it.
So true.
Well, that's a good pick, man. Again, it bums me out that I don't have it, but it's right there. So, I mean, there's zero. I have nothing to critique Veep about. It's just a damn good, funny show. Well, I'm going to jump into then mine. This was my pick that replaced Veep, so this was hard.
That's what she said.
And it is. It's another comedy. It also was 6 seasons, and it was created by Mike Judge. Mike Judge, we've talked about before on this podcast. He's who created Beavis and Butthead, the movie Office Space, and he also created this HBO series called Silicon Valley. And again, hilarious. It's just like Veep. It's like almost everything we just said about Veep, you can almost apply to Silicon Valley. You almost have to watch it again because you will miss things that, whether it's a gesture, the body language of an actor, their actual lines. This show, if you're not familiar with Silicon Valley, it's a hilarious look into a young group of computer nerds that basically one of them created this compression algorithm that he wanted to now unleash to the world through a company that he was going to create called Pied Piper. And the idea that he has, it's literally $1 billion tech idea. So when the tech world in Silicon Valley discovers that he created and came up with this concept and this algorithm, they all want it. And that's kind of then what the show is about, is because there's so much money on the line. Everything was so extreme all the time. And the cast of characters who basically were part of, this Pied Piper dream that they were chasing. Again, it's the character development. Now, Richard is the main character who created the algorithm. He's like the head nerd. And he's full of anxiety. He's full of stress. He's socially awkward. But then there's Ehrlich. Ehrlich's character delivers some of the funniest lines you'll hear in television. Period. End of story.
Thank you for meeting with us. We have a bunch of these things to go to, hopefully with more tasteful artwork. One of you is the least attractive person I've ever seen, and I'm not going to say who.
There's Guilfoyle, there's Dinesh, there's Jin Yang, there's Jared, and then, Big Head. And this little group of nerds that are trying to figure out how to best release this technology and become billionaires. And all the setbacks, all the mistakes, all the different people involved, and you're getting the attention of existing billionaires who want to take advantage of their invention. And God, I love it. I just love how different it was.
And they would insult each other constantly, and it was just rapid fire, much like Veep, like you mentioned at the top
Exactly.
of that.
You called me a shit-riddled anal wasteland.
You called me a chode gargling fuck toilet.
It's brilliant. And my wife is actually, her job is a computer full stack developer, I think is what it's called. And all that shit is way over my head. It's basically, she's into like computer coding and everything I look at when she's working, her screen is all Greek. It's all just nonsense code.
Like
crap.
the Matrix.
Yeah. And exactly it is. And she would get some of the jokes, because like you said, you don't have to be a computer nerd to laugh at that show. It's absolutely hilarious. But there are jokes that are meant for people that do get that stuff. And she would catch things and she would have to explain them to me, different jokes, and so it was actually the tech and the terminology they used was legitimate. I mean, it wasn't just made up. They actually were talking about real things, so that if you happen to be somebody who understood that element, you would get some of those jokes too. But yeah, I loved it. And it didn't make my list. It's funny, you had Veep and Silicon Valley as your two you were weighing against each other. And I had the same debate. Silicon Valley, I probably wouldn't have put it on my list over Veep in any situation, just because I do like Veep more. But I have watched Silicon Valley all the way through a couple of times, and again, laughs every episode, just full of laughs.
And again, that's why it's so hard to. And again, that's the point of this podcast. We are forced to come up with four. Yeah, we can cheat once in a while, and we talk about things that didn't make our list just to make it sound like we're acknowledging it. But yeah, to pit Silicon Valley to me up against Veep, that's brutal. That's unfair.
Yeah, it is.
And I just had to go with my gut. And it's not to take anything away from Veep, but I have to stick with it. I made my decision. My ruling is final. Silicon Valley is on my Mount Rushmore.
We could have easily had another match with Veep, with Silicon Valley, with Sopranos. We could have actually had four of the exact same series on our.
Yeah,
we already did we matched Curb already, but that's I'm glad we didn't, because again, these are all shows that we both like, so it's nice to be able to talk about them. But
yeah,
but I guess are we back to me then for my final? I think we are.
What's your final answer?
My final one is one that it's definitely more current. It just wrapped up its final season not too long ago. This show is Succession, and it's a very unique show.
I love Succession.
What's sad about this show is there's only 4 seasons. We talk about some of these other episodes or other shows like Veep had 7 seasons. Curb what Curb have 12 seasons. Curb Enthusiasm. So it's Succession only 4 seasons, which is kind of heartbreaking because it was such a great show and only 39 episodes. So and yet 4 seasons, 39 episodes, it was still enough to make it onto my Mount Rushmore because it's just that good of a show.
Rightfully so.
It's produced by Will Ferrell and his production partner Adam McKay, who helped to bring it to HBO. Those two guys did, and it's officially called a satirical dark comedy drama, which seems weird to me, but that's how they officially title it. The style of show it is. I mean, it makes some sense. It makes some sense because the dark part at different times in this series, those characters are all pretty unlikable. At sometimes you kind of like them or root for certain characters at different points, but at some point in that series, you pretty much dislike every one of them because
they're messed up, man. They're not good people.
They're not good people, and they're all related to each other too, which makes it probably even that more strange. I don't know why they call it a comedy drama. There are parts there's some comedy elements where they're sort of making fun at each other. There's some rapid fire insults, I guess they throw back and forth.
It's a fungus, they think. Benign fungus.
Great title for your memoir.
Come all the way up. Fuck you. Come all the way up.
I am surrounded by snakes and fucking morons!
Nice vest, Wamsgans. It's so puffy.
Thank you, Roman.
What's it stuffed with? Your hopes and dreams?
I just think it's the best
Tom, you need to shut up. This isn't the time to get your conscience out and shout, hey, look at me, I cannot tell a lie, I'm a good little boy, look at my ding-dong.
Maybe you'll meet a wealthy widow and you can seduce her with your sad eyes. She can keep you as a pet in Westchester. I'm thankful that I am going to be marrying into one of the most kind and loving families in the world.
Which can be funny. But I wouldn't call this a comedy by any means.
No, not at all. It was definitely more of a drama, a thriller is kind of how I would maybe label it.
Definitely, a dramatic thriller. Not thriller in the sense where there's car chases or people whose lives are on the line all the time, but it's
suspenseful.
It's suspenseful in the fact that because they're dealing with all this, all these situations that the family is going through, and bad things happen to them. Bad things happen to the characters. Bad things happen to the family and the company. I've used this comparison to a few people describing this show. If you like the show Yellowstone, I can kind of see some comparisons between Succession and Yellowstone. So
very much so.
I'll describe them here for people that haven't watched either one of them. Both of them show a wealthy family who have a lot of power in their respective areas. With Yellowstone, they have all this land in Montana, and they have a lot of power in that part of the country. With Succession, it takes place in New York City. They have a lot of power in the corporate world. It's about their corporate empire that this family owns.
Yeah, the media company that they own.
Yeah. And they have a ton of money. They're billionaires, multi-billionaires. And and in both cases, in both families, they're sometimes willing to do things that are outside of the law to suit their own personal needs, because
you can almost count on it.
You can almost count on it because, let's face it, they're all very selfish. They're selfish people. They've got each of those TV shows has a father who's trying to step away from the family business and trying to figure out what his legacy is going to be with his kids. The kids and siblings in both shows are greedy, petty, sometimes selfish. They tend to fight among themselves, and they always want a bigger piece of that ultimate pie than what they probably deserve or probably will end up getting. So they're always kind of so that basically describes both of those TV shows. So if you're somebody who watches Yellowstone, I think you would like Succession. I really do. It's just kind of it's a different element. It's in the city. So I would recommend. I know Yellowstone's an extremely popular show, and if you like that show, give Succession a try. I think you'd like it.
That's a good point. There are definite parallels with the plots. You're 100% spot on, and one of the biggest things that does overlap each other is not just those things, but it's also like the focus and how they feature these damaged characters, all pursuing kind of the same goal, and how they go about it and what they'll do. That nothing will get in their way. No one will get in their way. And they both kind of have that mentality in both those TV series. And you're right. Yeah. I love Succession. I also love Yellowstone. And now that you say that, you're right. There's definitely a comparison to be made there. It's almost like the old, Kevin Costner movie, just while we're on Kevin Costner, because of Yellowstone, that a lot of people thought that, when he came out with his movie that really exploded him, was Dances with Wolves. And then all these years later with James Cameron, when he made Avatar, a lot of people were like, well, Avatar's plotline is basically Dances with Wolves. And so if you ever look at it that way, it's kind of accurate. It doesn't take away from anything. I don't get all worked up. I don't think that's necessarily a stolen idea. It's a concept. You don't own a concept. And I think that applies to both of these. But yeah, God, that's a great pick, though.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the sort of arc of all the series that we've talked about, going back to, I suppose Sopranos probably came right before Curb or around that same time. So we're talking about 25 years worth of shows, with Succession just having wrapped up not too long ago. So that 24 plus years, it makes you really wonder, what's the next thing? I wonder what the next show is going to be.
What's the next big dog that just kind of takes the country by storm because it's new, it's different.
Yeah.
The concept, the storyline, the plot.
I'm looking forward to whatever it'll be.
If you're listening to this, you probably can pick up on the fact that John and I are TV dorks. We love TV.
Who the hell cares?
But my last pick here is such a great example. It's the best example I can give you of don't judge a book by its cover. Now, the pick is Game of Thrones, so I'll get that out of the way. Now, I had been hearing about it, and I was late to the party on this one. I knew it was there. I clearly have HBO, and I had just ignored it because I thought, how nerdy is this? It's like Dungeons and Dragons. It's a show about dragons and castles and knights, and just not my thing. But my word was I way wrong because I'll never forget. It was a random just decision I made on my own late one night, which is, again, where I watch a lot of my TV. I just was scrolling through the big menu of, all right, what should I watch? There's nothing new. I don't have anything on my DVR. I guess I'll start a new series. I'm scrolling through HBO and I see Game of Thrones. And at this point, I think there was like 4, maybe 5 seasons in. So that's what I mean when I say I was late to the party. So I watched the pilot episode, season 1, episode 1. And the next thing I know, I was up till about 4:35 in the morning. It was hard hitting, just graphic TV that I had not seen anything like this before, as far as like cinematography, how it's filmed, the violence, the nudity.
Hey now.
Oh yeah.
It's fun to watch late at night. It just was. So I became obsessed, and then I just caught up, and then before you know it, I'm caught up to when it was still airing live. And they too, like, all of a sudden skipped a year or 2 or whatever it was.
They did.
There was 8 seasons. It ran 2011 through 2019. I guess I look at it this way. There's two points that I really want to make sure I come across, because I just know you're going to have some things to say about Game of Thrones too. I know this will sound crazy, but the imagination and creativity to create this series, these characters, this world, I actually kind of put it in the same ballpark as Star Wars.
Huh?
Because of the amount of characters, the importance of all these characters. They all have a purpose. It's kind of like Star Wars to me. It's just a newer version, and with CSI and how real they make this stuff look. It's incredible.
Also CGI.
What did I just say?
CSI.
CSI is not ever going to be on a Mount Rushmore of any list I can come up with. So damn it. Shame.
Shame. Shame.
Shame. Shame.
The other thing about this show that I have to point out, it's one of the reasons I love it so much. It's Peter Dinklage. It's his character as Tyrion Lannister. He steals the show. He really does. And who else could have played that role better than Peter Dinklage? Are you kidding?
Do you wish to confess?
Yes, Father. I'm guilty. Guilty. Is that what you want to hear?
Do you admit you poisoned the king?
No. Of that I'm innocent. I'm guilty of a far more monstrous crime. I'm guilty of being a dwarf.
You are not on trial for being a dwarf.
Oh, yes I am. I've been on trial for that my entire life.
I liked it a lot too. I watched it from the beginning. As you know, we talked about it as it was airing. I'm pretty sure I watched that one from beginning. But I enjoyed it a lot. It was didn't make my list. It was one of the ones I thought about. As you said, we could easily put together a second list of Mount Rushmore shows, and if we did that, I'd have to have Game of Thrones on there. The thing about that show too, you mentioned the CGI, of course, or CSI, whichever one you want to go with. We'll either way works for me. But it is. It's the type of show that you couldn't. Let's pretend like you had the idea to bring that show to TV 20 years earlier. It just the way they would have filmed it would have been completely different, and it would have been not as cool. It wouldn't have been as believable. The world that they created wouldn't have been as realistic, and so it came to fruition at the right time as far as technology goes to make it look so good and so realistic. The characters were great. There's so many characters. There's got to be like 100 characters on that show too. I mean, people who actually had legitimate storylines, not just like flash in the pan type people, but actually had storylines. And they all had weird names, which was hard for me to remember. I never remembered anybody's names because
it was tough. You almost there's times you almost just had to roll with it, and you kind of still knew what was going on, even though you're like, I know the last 5 minutes they've been talking about that. Who is that?
Yeah, who is that? But then you see who it is, and it's like, oh yeah, that guy. I mean, I've seen him a million times. Of course, you know, you just didn't. Jon Snow was an easy name to remember. He was like
one of the easiest ones to remember.
Why couldn't they have all been Jon Snow type names? I don't know, but no, it was
a great show.
I loved it. It was a good show. I can't say anything bad about that one. It was a lot of fun to watch that one. You know, decent the way they wrapped up that show. I would say I didn't have any problems with that. So
don't have a beef there. And again, Emilia Clarke, her nude scenes. I think it was by design too. It's because it's a lot of the first season is that. So it grabbed, for knuckleheads like me.
Yeah,
I give it a try, and then I'm like, ooh.
By design, they got away from it. Like the later seasons hardly had any of that, because people were watching and they had the numbers and they didn't need to do all those things anymore.
They had their hooks in you, so you, whether that's why you started,
because it was a good show. Yeah, exactly. People kept watching it, and it was probably one of the highest rated HBO series of all time.
Look at the 7 shows because we matched on Curb. Look at the 7 shows we just discussed. These are like some of the best TV shows ever made.
They are, for sure.
Period.
HBO is kind of the king of TV series in terms of
they were the first to the party.
Yeah, premium cable type shows, and way before actual streaming. This is when it was still just cable channels. Yeah. One quick honorable mention I want to say is the show Oz, which actually came out before any of the shows we mentioned. That was in the 90s.
That's a great show too. Damn it.
That is one of the darkest, sometimes disturbing shows I've ever seen in my life. And talk about people that went on to do other things. That show is loaded with stars that went on to do other things. Christopher Maloney was one that's on the Law and Order shows. J.K. Simmons played a Nazi on that show, a very scary dude on that show. And then he goes on to play he plays all these lovable, heartwarming type characters later on. But anyway, I love that show, but I had to at least mention it.
That was fun though. These are, again, these are good shows. So check us out, follow us. You know the drill, for crying out loud. And you got anything to add there, Mr. John Hanson?
No, other than to say you can find all of our old episodes at whatsyourmountrushmore.com.
Yeah, so check them out. There's some good stuff out there floating around. And this week we will thank our sponsor, and we'll see you on the flip side. But thank you, Earl Brown Bowl.